Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of the NetQuest podcast, keeping you updated with all the latest news during the college basketball offseason. I'm your host, Zach Malamud, and let's get right into today's topics. It's Thursday, June 22nd, and Bob Huggins, just a couple of days ago, resigned as the head coach at the University of West Virginia, and it came after a DUI arrest Saturday night in Pittsburgh. Huggins now retiring 345 and 203 in 16 years that he had at West Virginia. 38 years as a coach. He coached at Akron, Cincinnati, Kansas State, and then finished off his career at West Virginia. Obviously, a lot of trouble off the basketball court and outside of West Virginia. And that led ultimately to his resignation and a really big career and one of the most popular coaches in all of college basketball. Definitely puts a stain now on his career just based on how it ended. However, you got to think about the positives and what he was able to do. 860 wins or over 860 wins in college basketball with combined with four different programs. A really top-notch coach, and his career definitely deserves the recognition that he's been getting. However, yes, there is a stain based on the events that happened on Saturday night in Pittsburgh. But Bob Huggins no longer on the sideline at West Virginia, and they will have to move on without him. Still a bit of a question mark of who's going to take over, whether it's going to be an assistant or they find somebody else for the Mountaineers this season. However, let's move on to our next topic, and we're staying in the topic of head coaches. Danny Hurley, as he signed a 6-year, $32.1 million extension to stay at UConn for 6 more years. 104 and 55, his record in 5 years as the head coach at UConn. Obviously, the national championship last season, but this guy's been all the way around in college basketball. Wagner, Rhode Island, now UConn, and he's been very successful in this stop in Storrs, Connecticut. Obviously, like I said, the national championship, but his ability in recruiting to bring in some really high-powered prospects and recruits for this UConn basketball program, and they're going to be just as good as they were last year. A ton of new players coming in, some really high-profile recruits coming in for Danny Hurley's team, and it should be interesting heading into this season. But he signs that big extension, making him one of the highest-paid coaches in all of college basketball. Let's move on to our next topic, and staying in the coaching carousel once again, we go to Penny Hardaway at Memphis. He was suspended 3 games for his violation of recruiting, and a 3-game ban for recruiting violations. This happened back in 2021, where he had 2 in-home visits for a recruit who is not supposed to come in till this year, 2023, obviously against the rules for the NCAA, and that broke the violations for Penny Hardaway, and he is now suspended for 3 games. So Memphis, without their head coach, most likely going to be non-conference scheduled games. However, Penny Hardaway not going to be on the sideline for this start of this season and the 3 games to start his season this year at Memphis. Let's move on to our next topic, and we go to Creighton, where Arthur Kaluma has decided to leave. He's transferring to Kansas State, and he'll be there next season. 11.8 points per game, 6 rebounds per game, 1.6 assists per game last season at Creighton for Arthur Kaluma. Creighton were able to keep Ryan Kalkbrenner, Trey Alexander, and Baylor Shireman. They also added Stephen Ashworth from Utah State. They did lose Ryan Nembhard to Gonzaga, but they're able to keep some really big stars. And they, like I said, added Stephen Ashworth, a guard, to maybe replace Ryan Nembhard. It is going to be interesting to see how they do replace Arthur Kaluma. Obviously, they kept Kalkbrenner, Alexander, and Shireman, but those three they had last season didn't really add too much other than Ashworth, who's a guard. It might hurt them a little bit down low. We'll see what happens with Greg McDermott's side going into this season down in Omaha. But let's move on to our fifth topic, and it's down in Alabama as Jarin Stevenson, the number 13 recruit, has reclassified, committed to Alabama, and he's reclassified to this season, 2023. It's going to be a really strong season once again for Nate Oates' team. Obviously, a ton of losses to the NBA draft. Brandon Miller, Noah Clowney, and Charles Bediako all going to the NBA draft. Jaden Bradley transferred to Arizona. Namari Burnett transferred to Michigan. However, they kept a bunch of guys at Alabama. Mark Sears, Javon Quinterly, Nick Pringle. They also added 3 more recruits besides Jarin Stevenson. And then they went in the transfer portal, did a great job there. Latrell Wrightsell Jr. from Cal State Fullerton. He averaged 16.3 points per game for Cal State Fullerton last season. Aaron Estrada, who averaged 20.2 points per game at Hofstra last season, he's going to Alabama. And Grant Nelson from North Dakota State, he averaged 17.9 points per game. A ton of scoring coming in for Nate Oates' team. Obviously, in a little bit of lower conferences and mid-level conferences in Division One, but they'll take it. Those guys are really strong players, will really have an impact this year and add to the guys that Alabama was able to keep. Of course, with the ton of losses, into the NBA draft, it's not going to be easy. Miller, Clowney, and Bediako all out the door for the Crimson Tide, but Nate Oates has things figured out. A good recruiting class coming in. Obviously, the transfer portal, they did a great job in, but Jarin Stevenson is going to have an impact. Like I mentioned, number 13 recruit now this year in ESPN's 100. A really perfect guy to add to the roster, and should be another good season for Alabama and Nate Oates. And let's move on to our final topic, and that's coming at St. John's University as Simeon Wilcher, who committed to North Carolina for this upcoming season, was getting prepared to start his season in Chapel Hill. However, he's been taken away by Rick Pitino and St. John's. He was the number 28 recruit in ESPN's 100, and Rick Pitino is able to take him away from North Carolina. A big steal there, and Simeon Wilcher finds himself in Queens, New York, and in the Big East, should have an impact for this St. John's team. They lost a ton of players: David Jones, Andre Curbelo, Posh Alexander, Montez Mathis, and Dylan Adewusu. However, they added a ton of guys from Rick Pitino's Iona team that he coached last year into the NCAA tournament. 4 Iona transfers coming in from that team last year: RJ Lewis from UMass, Jordan Dingle from Penn, Glenn Taylor Jr. from Oregon State. Jordan Dingle, a really strong player out of the Ivy League, and averaged 20 points per game in the Ivy League last season. A big, strong scorer for Rick Pitino's side, and it should help them out in this upcoming season. They were also able to keep Joel Soriano, their big man down low, averaged a ton of triple doubles, a ton of triple doubles this season at St. John's, and should have an impact once again for St. John's this season. Obviously, getting that big man down low, that Oscar Tshiebwe type guy down in the paint. Joel Soriano can really do it all. He can score, he can rebound, just a really good defender as well. It's going to be a good season with Rick Pitino taking over at St. John's. And like I said, they're able to grab Simeon and steal him away from North Carolina. But that will do it for episode 4 of the NetQuest podcast. I've been your host, Zach Malamud, and tune in next week as we discuss more of the latest headlines out of the college basketball world. We are just 137 days away from the start of the college basketball season.